The sound came first, silk tearing, the kind of rip that echoes through stone and stained glass through
Please,
500
we
bodies
have to
holding their
leave
breath
now.
in
I
pews of
can't.
polished oak.
You know what I have to
The
do.
kind that makes
But you'll
men shift
die.
uncomfortably in their starched collars and women clutch their fans tighter, grateful it isn't them kneeling at that altar. Cordelia Thorne felt the cold air hit her shoulder blade before she registered the pain. The beadwork scattered across the marble floor like spilled pearls, each tiny crystal, bouncing once, twice, settling into the grooves between stones that had witnessed a century of vows. Lies mostly, but none quite like this. Her aunt's hand was still twisted in the fabric. Marguerite Thorne's fingers, gloved in black bombazine, despite the spring warmth, clutched the ivory silk like a woman drowning. Her rings cut through the delicate, Worth-designed $2,000 of Parisian craftsmanship, destroyed in a single motion. The dress had been a gift. Everything Marguerite gave came with conditions. You are nothing. The words rolled through Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church like smoke from snuffed candles. Marguerite's voice carried well. She'd practiced that particular tone for 47 years, honing it in drawing rooms across Manhattan until it could slice through conversation and bone with equal precision. Cordelia didn't move, didn't cover the exposed skin, didn't cry. 8 years of living under Marguerite's roof had taught her one lesson that mattered: show pain, and they enjoy it more. The congregation shifted. Silk rustled against velvet. Fans fluttered nervously, stirring the heavy air thick with incense and expensive perfume. But no one stood. Not Mrs. Astor in the third row, her diamonds catching light from the chandeliers. Not the Vanderbilts, who'd sent a cousin to represent the family. Not the Carnegies or the Morgans or any of the assembled pillars of New York society who'd come to witness what they thought would be a fairy tale. An orphan marrying up, how quaint. Marguerite held the torn lace aloft like evidence before a jury. Her black dress caught the afternoon light, filtering through stained glass, turning her into a dark angel presiding over Judgment Day. This girl, she announced, turning toward the crowd with theatrical precision, is the burden I have carried for 8 years. Cordelia's fingers trembled around the lily bouquet. White flowers for purity. The stems were already wilting in her grip petals, browning at the edges. Even they were giving up. Ungrateful. Worthless. Marguerite's voice dropped to something almost tender, which made it worse. A charity case who has brought nothing but embarrassment to the Thorne name. A ripple of whispers spread through the church like wind through wheat. Cordelia caught fragments. Poor dear. What can you expect? Bad blood always shows. At the altar, Percival Ashworth stepped back. Just one step, but it might as well have been a mile. His morning coat was immaculate, tailored on Savile Row with buttons that probably cost more than most men earned in a month. He adjusted his diamond cufflinks, a nervous habit, and looked at his mother in the front pew. Mrs. Cordelia Ashworth nodded, permission granted. I will not marry her, Percival said. His voice held the calm certainty of a man who'd never faced real consequences. The arrangement was clearly misrepresented. Several men in the congregation nodded. A few women leaned toward each other, murmuring behind gloved hands. The organist unsure whether to continue or stop. Let the Bach prelude fade into uncertain silence. Cordelia stood alone beneath the altar arch, the same arch where her parents had married 23 years ago, back when the Thorne name meant something other than scandal and stolen inheritances. Sunlight streamed through the window of St. Michael, slaying the dragon, painting her ruined dress in shades of crimson and gold. The irony wasn't lost on her. Dragons always won in real life. Blood appeared on the marble, just a drop dark against white stone. Her knees, she realized distantly. She'd fallen hard when Marguerite grabbed her. The impact had split skin through silk stockings, but she barely felt it. Physical pain was easier than the other kind. Still no one moved. 500 witnesses and not a single soul willing to stand. Not for an orphan with no fortune and a borrowed dress. Not for a girl whose only sin was surviving when her parents died. The silence stretched, became something living, something that fed on shame and fear and the particular cruelty of people who mistake wealth for virtue. Then a voice cut through it all. That is quite enough. The words weren't loud, didn't need to be. They carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind that comes from men who've never had to raise their voices to be heard. Every head turned. A man rose from the last pew, slowly, deliberately, like a judge standing to deliver a verdict the courtroom already knew would be harsh. He was tall, over 6 feet broad-shouldered, in a way that suggested regular physical work, despite the expensive tailoring. His frock coat was black, perfectly cut, with a silver-headed walking stick that gleamed under the chandeliers. Dark hair close-cropped. A scar bisected his left eyebrow, pale against tan skin. His age was difficult to place, somewhere between 30 and 40, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen things drawing rooms couldn't imagine. Even before the vicar gasped his name, half the congregation already knew. Dashiell Ravenscroft, the railroad baron, the Iron Duke, the man who'd built an empire from ash and ambition after his father's suicide, who controlled 10,000 miles of track and the futures of the cities they connected. Worth $50 million by conservative estimates, though. No one really knew for certain. Money like that stopped being countable and became simply power. He walked down the aisle. The crowd parted instinctively. Mrs. Astor actually moved her skirts aside as he passed, which was remarkable given she rarely acknowledged anyone's existence below her social tier. The Vanderbilt cousin went pale. 2 Carnegie representatives found sudden interest in their shoes. Dashiell Ravenscroft didn't look at any of them. His gray eyes, the color of winter storms over the Atlantic, were fixed on only one person. The girl at the altar, wrapped in humiliation and torn silk, staring at the floor as if the marble might offer escape. He stopped 3 feet from Cordelia, close enough to shield her from the congregation's gaze, close enough that she could smell his cologne bergamot and cedar, nothing like the cloying sweetness Percival wore. Marguerite's mouth opened. "Your Grace." The title was wrong. Ravenscroft had no aristocratic blood, but people called him that anyway, afraid to use his first name, afraid of familiarity with a man who could destroy fortunes with a telegram. He didn't acknowledge her. His attention remained on Cordelia. For a moment, neither spoke. The church held its collective breath. Then Dashiell Ravenscroft did something that would be discussed in drawing rooms for years. He removed his coat. The dark wool was heavy, lined with silk. It smelled of tobacco and expensive leather and something else, gunpowder maybe, though that seemed impossible for a man of his station. He draped it over Cordelia's shoulders with careful precision, covering the ruined bodice of her dress. His fingers brushed her neck as he fastened the top button, and she flinched. "Easy," he murmured, so quiet only she could hear. "I'm not going to hurt you." His hands were scarred across the knuckles. Working hands despite the manicure and gold signet ring. Hands that had built things, broken things. The gesture sent a wave of whispers through the pews like wind through leaves. Cordelia slowly lifted her gaze. Their eyes met, both gray, though his were darker, harder. The kind of eyes that had seen men die and balance ledgers afterward without losing sleep. But there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like recognition. "Miss Thorne," his voice was low, controlled. The kind of voice that could negotiate million-dollar contracts or sentence men to ruin without rising above conversational volume. "I don't know you," Cordelia whispered. Her throat was raw. Had she screamed? She couldn't remember. "But I know you." He paused, then added with absolute certainty, "I have been watching over you." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Marguerite's face went from indignant red to pale white in seconds. Percival took another step back, nearly stumbling over the altar steps. The vicar cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Ravenscroft, this is highly irregular." Dashiell ignored him completely. His attention remained fixed on Cordelia, studying her face as if memorizing it, or perhaps comparing it to a memory. "Years ago," he continued quietly, "I stopped in Rhinebeck, a small town on the Hudson. Do you remember?" Cordelia's breath caught. She remembered. Of course she remembered. The worst day of her life until this one. "There was a cemetery," Dashiell said. "Old stones, some dating back to the Revolution. I walked there while my carriage was being repaired." His voice softened slightly. "And I saw a girl kneeling beside 2 fresh graves, pulling weeds with her bare hands." Memory crashed through her. July heat, the smell of turned earth. Her mother's grave on the left, her father's on the right. Both dead 3 days. The railway accident that wasn't an accident, though she hadn't known that yet, wouldn't know for years. "You were crying," Dashiell said. "I was 15, Cordelia managed. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "You were alone, Supun." 2 words. They held the weight of truth she'd tried to forget. Alone then, alone now. Always alone except for Marguerite's poisonous charity. Dashiell finally looked away from her. turned to face the congregation. 500 of New York's wealthiest, most powerful people. They stared back like children caught sneaking sweets. This ceremony, he said clearly, voice carrying to every corner of the vast church, is concluded. Marguerite found her voice. You ungrateful wretch! She lurched toward Cordelia, hand raised. Dashiell moved between them. Didn't touch Marguerite, didn't need to. He simply stood there, and she stopped as if hitting an invisible wall. I suggest, he said conversationally, that you remove yourself from this church before I forget my manners entirely. Percival finally spoke. See here, Ravencroft, you can't just... I own your debts, Ashworth. Dashiell's tone didn't change. Still pleasant, still controlled, which somehow made the threat more terrifying. All $300,000 of them. Speak again, and I'll call them in by Monday morning. The color drained from Percival's face. His mother made a small sound like a wounded animal. Dashiell turned back to Cordelia, extended his hand. Come with me. She stared at his palm, scarred knuckles, calloused fingers, a hand that had clearly done more than sign checks and shake hands at society functions. Behind her, an aunt who'd stripped her dignity in front of 500 witnesses. A man who'd rejected her publicly. Hundreds of people who'd watched her humiliation and done nothing. Before her, a stranger. A terrifying stranger with a reputation that filled newspapers and haunted boardrooms. A man who claimed to have watched over her from the shadows. But also the only person in this entire church who had stepped forward. Cordelia placed her hand in his. The gasps turned to full exclamations. Marguerite shrieked something incomprehensible. Mrs. Astor's fan snapped shut with a crack like a gunshot. Dashiell's fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, sure. He led her down the aisle, past the gawking guests, past the Vanderbilts and Carnegies and Morgans, past Mrs. Astor, who watched with an expression that might have been approval or might have been calculation with Risher. It was always hard to tell. Past the altar where she was supposed to have promised her life to a man who saw her as a transaction. Past the shattered remains of the future Marguerite had planned for her. Out into May's sunshine that hurt her eyes after the church's gloom. A carriage waited at the curb. Black lacquer with gold trim pulled by 4 matching bay horses that probably cost more than most houses. The Ravencroft monogram gleamed on the door in R, intertwined with a raven in flight. Dashiell helped her inside before the congregation could pour out to witness more scandal. His hand on her elbow was firm, but careful. Like she was something breakable he'd learned to handle with precision. The door closed with a decisive click. Leather seats creaked. Outside, she could hear shouting. Marguerite's voice probably. The vicar trying to restore order. Society combusting in real time. For the first time since the Silk Tour, Cordelia was surrounded by silence. She sat stiffly still, clutching her dying bouquet. The coat around her shoulders smelled of cedar and bergamot and something that might have been gun oil. Her knees throbbed where they'd hit marble. Blood seeped through the silk stockings, dark against white. Dashiell sat across from her, didn't speak, just watched her with those storm-gray eyes as the carriage began to move. Cordelia stared at her hands. They were trembling. Not from cold, from everything that had just happened. From the realization that her life had irrevocably changed in the span of 10 minutes. Why, the word came out hoarse. Why what? Why did you come to the church? She forced herself to meet his gaze. Why intervene? Dashiell was quiet for a long moment. Gravel crunched under the wheels. Somewhere outside, a newsboy shouted headlines that would be obsolete by evening once word of this spread. Because I could not stay away any longer, he finally said. That answer unsettled her more than any dramatic declaration might have. There was something in his voice, something that suggested restraint finally breaking, control slipping after years of iron discipline. You said you knew me, that you've been watching. Yes. How long? He leaned forward slightly, rested his forearms on his knees. The carriage lantern light caught the scar through his eyebrow, making it look like a crack in marble. That day in Rhinebeck, Dashiell began. I was traveling from New York to Albany on railroad business. My horse threw a shoe. While the blacksmith worked, I walked to pass the time. He paused. I found the cemetery by accident, or perhaps fate. I've never been certain which. Cordelia's fingers tightened on the bouquet, lilies crushed between her palms. I saw a girl in a black dress that was too smally for her. She'd grown since it was purchased, probably. The hem was too short. The sleeves ended above her wrists. His voice remained steady, but something in his eyes shifted. She was kneeling beside two graves, Thomas and Margaret Thorne, dead 3 days prior in a railway accident. Stop, Cordelia's voice broke. You were pulling weeds with your bare hands. Your nails were bleeding. You'd been at it for hours, I think, trying to make their graves perfect. Please stop. You were crying. His gray eyes held hers, but quietly, like you'd learned early that loud grief brought unwanted attention. Your shoulders shook, but you didn't make a sound. Tears burned Cordelia's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. Crying in front of Marguerite had been forbidden. Crying in front of this stranger felt dangerous in a different way. I stood there, Dashiell continued, and I watched you grieve alone. I watched you bleed, pulling weeds from stones that marked the end of your world. And I knew. He stopped. Knew what? That I would not let you face that alone. The carriage hit a rut. Cordelia grabbed the strap to steady herself. The motion made her realize they'd left the city streets behind. Trees lined the road now. The Hudson River flashed silver between the trunks. You investigated me. It wasn't a question. Yes. For how long? From that day, nearly 7 years now. 7 years, not 6. The number felt important somehow, like precision mattered in obsession. You discovered my aunt stole my inheritance. Yes. Dashiell pulled a leather folder from beneath the seat, set it on the cushion between them. Bank records, forged signatures, witness statements from 4 servants who worked in your household. Marguerite diverted $80,000 from the accounts your parents left you. She's been spending it for 8 years. Cordelia stared at the folder like it might bite. That's why she kept me, not from charity. She needed you alive to maintain the legal fiction that she was managing your affairs appropriately. But she needed you powerless, isolated, grateful for scraps. 8 years of scraps, of hand-me-down dresses and attic rooms, of eating meals in the kitchen with servants, because Marguerite deemed her presence at the table inappropriate for guests. Of enduring casual cruelty disguised as instruction on proper behavior. And Percival, Dashiell's jaw tightened. I investigated him 2 years ago. He's proposed to 6 heiresses in the past 5 years, 3 accepted. All 3 are now destitute, or dead. The temperature in the carriage seemed to drop. Dead, one died in childbirth, the second from pneumonia. The third, he paused, fell from a window at their Newport cottage. The coroner ruled it suicide. But you don't think it was? I think Percival Ashworth is very skilled at marrying women with money and ensuring he inherits when convenient. His voice was cold now, factual, the tone of a man stating evidence. I think your aunt selected him specifically because he would marry you, take control of what remained of your inheritance, and then arrange for you to have an unfortunate accident. Cordelia's stomach turned. You're saying she planned to have me killed. I'm saying I've seen the will she had you sign last month, the one you thought was a trust document. It leaves everything to her as next of kin upon your death. The world tilted. Cordelia pressed her palm against the carriage wall, breathed slowly through her nose. She'd signed that document in Marguerite's study, hadn't read it carefully, had trusted God. She'd been such a fool. You waited, she said slowly. You gathered evidence. You watched. But you waited until today. Until you turned 21 and were legally free of her guardianship. Until I could act without her claiming parental authority. And the wedding, I received word of your engagement 6 weeks ago. Something dark flickered across his expression. I decided patience had reached its limit. They rode in silence for several minutes. The Hudson widened beside them, sunlight dancing on the water like scattered diamonds. Sailboats cut white wakes, fishermen hauled nets. Life continuing as if the world hadn't just cracked open. Where are you taking me? Cordelia finally asked. Newport, my home. Rhode Island. Yes, that was 3 hours by train or 6 by carriage, which seemed to be their current method. She should protest, should demand to be returned to where Marguerite's house was no longer an option. She had no other family, no money of her own, nowhere to go. I'm alone, she whispered. No, Dashiell's voice was quiet but absolute. You're not. The carriage crested a hill. Below Newport spread along the coast like a jeweled necklace. Massive estates lined the cliffs, cottages. In the terminology of the wealthy, though, most had 50 rooms and cost millions. Sails dotted the harbor, lighthouse beacons prepared for evening. And there on the northern point, a house that made the others look modest. Ravencroft Manor rose 3 stories from manicured lawns, limestone facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Palladian windows reflected clouds and sky. Gardens cascaded down toward the ocean in geometric perfection. The drive was lined with elms that had been growing since before the Revolution. "This is yours," Cordelia breathed. "This is home." The distinction seemed important somehow. Iron gates opened as they approached. No gatekeeper rushed out. They'd been expecting the carriage. How was that possible unless this had been planned? Unless Dashiell Ravencroft had known exactly what would happen at the church and prepared accordingly. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something something that might have been relief. The carriage stopped before the main entrance. 12 servants stood waiting in perfect formation. Footmen in dark livery, maids in crisp uniforms. And at the center, a butler who looked like he'd been carved from oak and discipline. Dashiell exited first, offered his hand to help her down. Cordelia took it, grateful for the stability. Her legs felt uncertain beneath her. The butler stepped forward, bowed precisely. "Welcome home, Mr. Ravencroft." Then his eyes moved to Cordelia. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture softened. "And Miss Thorne, your rooms in the East Wing are prepared." Cordelia blinked. "You know my name?" "Of course, miss." The butler's voice held the faintest Scottish burr. "We've been expecting you." She looked at Dashiell. He met her gaze steadily, didn't deny it. "This is Morrison," he said. "He runs the household. If you need anything, ask him." Morrison gestured toward the entrance. "If you'll follow me, Miss Thorne." The entry hall was vast, black and white marble checkerboard floors that looked like they could host a ball. A double staircase curved upward to the second-floor banisters carved from mahogany. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with classical scenes, gods and heroes in eternal struggle. Portraits lined the walls. Dashiell's ancestors, presumably. Though the man himself claimed no aristocratic blood, these looked like successful merchants and industrialists, men who'd built rather than inherited, women with intelligent eyes and determined chins. "Mr. Ravencroft," Morrison's voice interrupted her observation. "Shall I send a telegram to Pemberton? Tell him to file the embezzlement Monday morning. No delays." "Yes, sir." And Miss Thorne's status, Dashiell glanced at her. Something unreadable passed across his face. "She is my guest. Anyone who treats her otherwise will be terminated immediately." Morrison bowed. "Understood, sir." A woman descended the stairs, older, perhaps 60, with silver hair pinned in an elegant bun. She wore a housekeeper's black dress, but her bearing suggested she'd once moved in higher circles. "Miss Thorne," her voice was warm, genuine. "I'm Mrs. Opal Hawthorne. I'll show you to your rooms." "Thank you," Cordelia managed. Her voice sounded small in the vast space. Mrs. Hawthorne took her arm gently, not like a servant guiding a guest, like a mother steadying a daughter. "Come, dear, you've had quite a day." They climbed the staircase. Cordelia's torn dress caught on the steps. Dashiell's coat dragged behind her like a train. She felt acutely aware of how she must look, disheveled, bloody, wrapped in a man's clothing. But Mrs. Hawthorne didn't comment, just maintained gentle pressure on her arm. "Have you worked here long?" Cordelia asked, desperate for normal conversation. "5 years, dear, since Mr. Ravencroft purchased the manor." "It's beautiful." "He's worked very hard to make it so." They reached the second-floor landing. "The East Wing is this way." They walked down a corridor lined with more portraits, seascapes, a few modern paintings that had suggested Dashiell had expensive taste and the money to indulge it. Mrs. Hawthorne stopped at a door, opened it. "Your rooms." Cordelia stepped inside and stopped breathing. The suite was enormous, a sitting room with bay windows overlooking the Atlantic, furniture in pale blues and whites that echoed the ocean beyond, fresh flowers, ivory blooms she couldn't name arranged in crystal vases. Their scent filled the air. "The bedroom is through there." Mrs. Hawthorne pointed to another door, "and the dressing room beyond that." Cordelia walked to the window. 3 stories below, gardens spread toward cliffs that dropped to the sea. Flowers everywhere, some in bloom, some still budding, all perfectly maintained. "This is too much," she whispered. "It's exactly right." Mrs. Hawthorne moved to stand beside her. "You've been given very little for a very long time, dear. It's proper that changes." "I don't understand any of this." "I know." The housekeeper's voice was gentle. "But you will." Cordelia turned to face her. "How long has he been planning this?" "Planning what, dear?" "All of it. The rescue, this room, everything." Mrs. Hawthorne was quiet for a moment. "Then the renovations on the East Wing began 8 weeks ago, before the engagement was announced, before Percival proposed, before any of this should have been predictable." "He knew," Cordelia said slowly. "He knew what would happen. Mr. Ravencroft is a very thorough man." That was terrifying and somehow also comforting. "I'll have a bath drawn," Mrs. Hawthorne said, "and dinner will be sent up. You should rest." "Wait," Cordelia caught her arm. "Who are you really?" The housekeeper's expression shifted. Something passed across her face, memory perhaps, or old grief. "I knew your mother, Miss Cordelia." The world tilted again. "What?" "I was in service to the Thorne family before the accident." Mrs. Hawthorne's voice softened. "I was Margaret's lady's maid for 5 years." Cordelia felt tears burn her eyes again. Her mother had spoken of her maid sometimes. A kind woman who'd stayed with the family even after they fell on harder times, who disappeared after the deaths. "You left." "I tried to stay. Your aunt dismissed me 3 days after the funeral." Of course she had. Marguerite would have wanted no one around who remembered the family before. No witnesses to her theft. "Why are you here now?" Mrs. Hawthorne met her gaze steadily. "Because Mr. Ravencroft found me, asked me to join his household, said he would need someone who understood the Thorne family, who remembered what you'd lost." She paused. "I think he wanted you to have at least one person who knew your mother, who could tell you the truth about who she was." Cordelia's legs gave out. She sat heavily in a nearby chair. The day was too much. The revelations kept coming like waves, each one knocking her further off balance. "What boy?" she asked again. "Why would he do all this?" Mrs. Hawthorne knelt beside the chair, took Cordelia's hands in her own. "Because years ago he saw a girl grieving alone, and he decided she would never be alone again." "That's insane." "Perhaps," Mrs. Hawthorne smiled, "or perhaps it's devotion." She left Cordelia sitting in the chair staring at the ocean. Servants came and went. A bath was drawn in the marble bathroom, indoor plumbing, still a luxury in 1895. Towels appeared, soap that smelled of lavender, a white nightgown laid out on the bed. Cordelia mechanically went through the motions. Removed the torn dress, the bloodied stockings, sank into hot water that made her skin turn pink, watched years of grime and grief dissolve into steam. When she finally emerged clean and exhausted, dinner waited on a tray. Roasted chicken, vegetables she couldn't name. Bread so fresh it steamed when she broke it open. And a single ivory flower in a crystal vase. No note, none needed. Cordelia ate alone in her nightgown, sitting in a chair worth more than Marguerite had spent on her in 8 years, staring at a flower that probably cost more than most people earned in a week. She should have been afraid, should have been planning escape, should have questioned every moment of the past 12 hours. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Safe. Somewhere downstairs in a library filled with books and silence, Dashiell Ravencroft sat in a leather chair. He'd poured whiskey he had no intention of drinking, stared at the gardens blooming beyond the window. He'd waited years for this moment. Years of investigation and patience and watching from shadows. Years of seeing her grow from a grieving girl into a woman who learned to hide her pain behind dignity. Years of wanting something he had no right to claim. She was upstairs now, in rooms he'd prepared for her, wearing a nightgown selected to her size, eating dinner on plates that bore his family crest. He'd promised himself patience, had vowed to give her time to understand, to choose. But seeing her kneeling at that altar, blood on marble silk torn by cruelty, patience had its limits. Morrison entered quietly. "She's settled for the evening, sir." "Good. And the telegram?" "Sent. Pemberton will file Monday." "The other matter," Dashiell's jaw tightened. "What about it?" "The investigation into the railway accident. Dr. Harris sent his final report." Morrison set a folder on the desk. "You should read it." Dashiell didn't touch the folder. He knew what it would say. had suspected for years but needed proof before he could act. Thomas and Margaret Thorne hadn't died in an accident. They'd been murdered, and he was almost certain he knew who'd given the order. Not tonight, he said quietly. Tonight she needs to rest. Tomorrow will begin. Morrison bowed and withdrew. Dashiell remained in the chair as darkness fell over Newport. Lights appeared in distant houses. Stars emerged above the ocean. The tide came in constant and inevitable. In the east wing, Cordelia Thorne slept in a bed she'd never imagined lying in, dreamed of gray eyes and torn silk and hands that had pulled her from humiliation into something that felt dangerously like hope. Neither of them knew that in New York, Marguerite Thorne was reading a telegram from Percival Ashworth. Neither knew that revenge, once set in motion, moved in both directions. Neither knew that the real danger was only beginning. But they would learn, starting tomorrow. Morning came with the smell of flowers and the sound of breaking glass. Cordelia woke to sunlight streaming through bay windows she didn't recognize. For 3 disoriented seconds, she thought she was still in Marguerite's attic. Then memory crashed back to church, the torn dress, Dashiell Ravencroft's eyes watching her like she was a puzzle he'd spent years trying to solve. She sat up. The nightgown was real silk, not the rough cotton Marguerite provided. The bed was enormous, with a canopy that probably cost more than most houses. And through the window, the Atlantic Ocean spread toward the horizon, endless and impossibly blue. A knock at the door. "Come in," she called, then realized she should probably put on a robe first. Mrs. Hawthorne entered carrying a breakfast tray. Behind her came 2 maids with armfuls of fabric dresses in colors Cordelia had never worn. Emerald green, sapphire blue, deep burgundy. "Good morning, dear." Mrs. Hawthorne set the tray on a table near the window. "Mr. Ravencroft thought you might prefer to eat here rather than the dining room." Thoughtful or controlling? Cordelia wasn't sure which. "Where is he, Patrick?" "His study. He's been there since dawn." Mrs. Hawthorne poured tea from a silver pot. "Working on your case?" "My case," as if she were a problem to be solved through paperwork and strategy. Cordelia ate mechanically. Toast with real butter, eggs cooked perfectly, strawberries that tasted like summer, food she dreamed about during years of kitchen scraps and leftover soup. Afterwards, she examined the dresses. All her size, all expensive, all selected by a man who claimed to have known her but had never spoken to her until yesterday. She chose the emerald dress, not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because green had been her mother's favorite color. A small rebellion against forgetting. The maids helped her dress, laced the corset with practiced efficiency, arranged her dark hair in a style that looked effortless but probably took years to master. When they finished, Cordelia barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked like someone who belonged in a house like this. The illusion almost made her laugh. "Mr. Ravencroft asked if you'd join him in the study when you were ready," Mrs. Hawthorne said. "There are matters to discuss." Cordelia descended the grand staircase carefully. The marble was slippery in borrowed shoes. Portraits watched her pass Ravencroft ancestors with stern faces and knowing eyes, judging her, finding her wanting. Morrison materialized in the entrance hall like a ghost in formal wear. "Miss Thorne, this way, please." The study was in the west wing, dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that looked actually read rather than decorative. A massive desk dominated the room, covered with papers and ledgers and what appeared to be a detailed map of New York. Dashiell stood at the window staring at the ocean. He'd changed from yesterday's formal wear into something simpler. Dark trousers, white shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows. No jacket, no pretense. The informality should have made him seem less intimidating. It didn't. "You slept well?" he asked without turning. "Yes." Cordelia remained near the door. "Thank you for the room, and the dresses, and—" "Don't." He finally looked at her. "Don't thank me. This isn't charity." "Then what is it?" He gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." Cordelia sat. The leather chair was worn comfortable, shaped by years of use. Dashiell's chair, she realized. He'd given her his seat. He moved to perch on the edge of the desk instead. Close enough that she could see the scar through his eyebrow clearly, an old wound long healed but never quite forgotten. "I need to show you something," he said. "It won't be easy to see." He opened a folder, pulled out a document, and set it on the desk between them. Death certificate. Thomas Edward Thorne and Margaret Elizabeth Thorne. Cause of death, railway accident resulting in massive trauma. Cordelia's throat tightened. "Why are you showing me this?" Because it's a lie. Daschle produced another document. This one looked medical, technical. Dr. Benjamin Harris is a forensic pathologist, one of 3 in the country. I hired him 2 years ago to examine the accident records. Why Tom? Because railway accidents leave specific patterns. Broken bones, crush injuries, burns from the boiler explosion. His finger tapped the second document. Your parents had none of those. Cordelia forced herself to look. Medical terminology she barely understood. But the conclusion was clear enough, incompatible with reported cause of death. Then how did they die? Arsenic poisoning, administered approximately 6 hours before the accident. They were already dying when the carriage went over the embankment. The room tilted. Cordelia gripped the chair arms. Someone poisoned them, she said slowly, then staged an accident. Yes. Who? Daschle's gray eyes held hers. I can't prove it yet, but I have suspicions. He didn't need to say the name. Cordelia could see it in his face, in the careful way he was watching her, waiting for her to shatter. Marguerite. The inheritance passed to you, with her as guardian until you reach majority. She gained control of $80,000 and 8 years to spend it. He paused. And if you'd married Percival as planned, the rest would have gone to her after my convenient accident. Cordelia finished the thought, felt bile rise in her throat. She killed them for money. I believe so. Believe isn't proof. No. Daschle straightened, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out another folder. This one was thicker. But this might be. He spread the contents across the desk. Bank records, receipts, a chemist's ledger with Marguerite's name beside purchases of arsenic trioxide. Purchase date July 1889. 3 days before her parents died. Where did you get this? I have resources. He said it simply, not bragging, statement of fact. The chemist kept excellent records. Illegal to sell that quantity without documentation. He was happy to share when I explained the situation. Cordelia stared at her aunt's signature. The elegant loops and flourishes she'd seen on birthday cards and criticism notes. The same hand that had torn her dress yesterday. That had called her worthless in front of 500 witnesses. The same hand that had murdered her parents. What do? We build a case. Daschle's voice was firm, controlled. The voice of a man who'd toppled business empires and knew exactly how to destroy an enemy. We gather every piece of evidence, every witness, every receipt, and then we bury her. A knock at the door interrupted them. Morrison entered, face carefully blank, in that way that meant trouble. Sir, there's a situation. What kind? Mr. Ashworth is here, with his mother. Cordelia's heart stopped. Percival. He's demanding entry, says he has legal right to speak with Miss Thorne. Daschle's expression went cold, winter settling over stone. Does he? He moved toward the door with predatory grace, not rushing, not hesitating. Just moving with the certainty of a man who'd never had to fear consequences. Stay here, he told Cordelia. No. She stood. This concerns me. I'm coming. Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe, or surprise. He nodded once. Behind me. They walked together through the house. Morrison led them to the front entrance where 2 footmen stood blocking the door. Through the glass, Cordelia could see Percival pacing on the steps. His mother sat in their carriage fan, moving in agitated arcs. Let him in, Daschle said quietly. The footmen exchanged glances but obeyed. The door swung open. Percival stepped inside. He'd changed from yesterday's wedding finery into traveling clothes, still expensive but rumpled from the journey. His face was red with exertion or rage, or both. He saw Cordelia and went redder. There you are. Come along. This nonsense has gone on long enough. Miss Thorne isn't going anywhere, Daschle said. Percival finally looked at him. Really looked, taking in the informal clothes and rolled sleeves and complete absence of society manners. Ravencroft, I don't know what game you're playing, but Cordelia is my fiancée. Was. Daschle's correction was mild. Yesterday you rejected her publicly, in front of 500 witnesses. I believe your exact words were, I will not marry her. That was a misunderstanding, witnessed by half of New York society. Percival's jaw worked. Her aunt has concerns about propriety. An unmarried woman living in a bachelor's house is none of your concern. Daschle took one step forward. Just one. Percival stepped back. Or Marguerite's. You can't keep her here against her will. He's not. Cordelia's voice cut through the tension. Both men turned to look at her. I'm staying of my own choice. Cordelia, be reasonable. Don't. She moved to stand beside Dashiell, not behind, beside. Don't call me that. Don't pretend yesterday didn't happen. You rejected me. Your mother nodded permission like I was a business transaction gone bad. And now you want me back because... She stopped. Understood. Because Marguerite told you to. Percival's silence was confirmation enough. Get out, Dashiell said quietly. I have rights. You have debts, $300,000 of them. Dashiell's voice never rose. I bought them all yesterday afternoon, every note, every mortgage, every gambling marker. He paused. Would you like me to call them in? The color drained from Percival's face. That's what I thought. Dashiell gestured to Morrison. Show Mr. Ashworth out. If he returns, have the police remove him for trespassing. Percival opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Cordelia like she was something he'd lost and couldn't quite remember how. You'll regret this, he finally said. I regret wasting 8 years in my aunt's house. I regret believing her lies. I regret almost marrying you. Cordelia's voice was steady, but I don't regret this. Morrison and the footman escorted Percival to the door. He went without further protest, but his eyes promised revenge, or perhaps just wounded pride. Hard to tell the difference with men like him. The door closed with a decisive thud. Cordelia realized she was shaking, not from fear, from rage so pure it felt like lightning in her veins. Well done, Dashiell said quietly. I hate him. Good. Hate is useful. It has clarity. She looked up at Edom. What do we do now? Now, Dashiell said, we prepare for what comes next. 300 miles south in Manhattan, Marguerite Thorne sat in her parlor reading a telegram. Rejected. Ravencroft bought debts, girl staying willingly. P. Ashworth. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, Marguerite hadn't feared anything in 20 years. From fury. That ungrateful wretch. After everything Marguerite had done, 8 years of providing shelter and food and education. 8 years of tolerating her presence, of planning her future, of arranging the perfect marriage that would have solved everything cleanly. And she'd chosen to stay with Dashiell Ravencroft instead. Marguerite crumpled the telegram, threw it into the fire burning in the hearth despite the warm May weather, watched the paper curl and blacken. She'd underestimated Ravencroft, assumed he was just another wealthy bachelor with too much money and too little sense, that his intervention at the church had been impulsive, romantic nonsense. But buying Percival's debts in a single afternoon required planning, resources, the kind of ruthless efficiency Marguerite recognized because she possessed it herself. He knew something, must know something. Why else interfere? A knock at the door. Her housekeeper entered, a girl named Sarah Young and eager to please. She'd only been in service 3 months. The previous housekeeper had left suddenly last week. Something about a sick mother in Connecticut. Marguerite didn't remember approving the departure, but then servants came and went. They rarely mattered. Your tea, ma'am. Set it there. Marguerite gestured to the side table without looking up. The girl obeyed, started to leave. Wait, Marguerite studied her. How are you finding the work? Very well, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity. You're grateful, then? Yes, ma'am. Very much so. Good. Gratitude was useful, made people pliable, willing to overlook things that might otherwise trouble them. Marguerite stood, walked to her desk, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, receipts, letters, a few personal items. Nothing important, just the detritus of daily life. Except for one item, a small glass vial filled with white powder, arsenic trioxide, the same compound she'd purchased in 1889, the same poison that had stopped Thomas and Margaret's hearts before the carriage ever hit the embankment. She'd kept it all these years. Insurance. You never knew when problems would need solving. Sarah was dusting the mantelpiece, back turned. Young, trusting, the kind of girl who'd never imagined her employer capable of harm, which made what happened next almost too easy. Sarah, dear, I've been meaning to ask, have you been in my study recently? The girl turned face puzzled. Your study, ma'am? No, ma'am, you told me never to go in there without permission. And yet, Marguerite walked slowly toward her. I could have sworn I saw someone near my desk yesterday evening. looking through papers. Ma'am, I swear I haven't. Receipts, old correspondence, the kind of private documents a curious girl might find. Interesting. Sarah's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Marguerite's voice dropped to something soft. Dangerous. You seem nervous, dear. Guilty even. I haven't done anything. Then you won't mind proving it. Marguerite gestured to the tea service. That tea is getting cold. Why don't you have some, I insist. The girl looked at the cup, at Marguerite. Understanding dawned slowly in her eyes. I'm not thirsty, ma'am. I said I insist. The softness was gone, only threat remained. Unless there's a reason you're refusing. Sarah's hands started to shake. Please, ma'am, I didn't see anything, I swear. But she had. Marguerite could see it in her face. The girl had been in the study, had probably dusted the desk and seen receipts she shouldn't have. Receipts from a chemist on Delancey Street. Purchases of substances no respectable widow should own. The girl knew too much, or suspected too much, same difference. Drink the tea, Sarah. No, the word came out as a whisper, I won't. Marguerite sighed, reached into her pocket and pulled out a small bell, rang at once. Two men entered from the hallway, large, rough-looking. Not the kind of people normally found in a Gramercy Park townhouse. The kind Marguerite hired when problems needed solving and couldn't be handled with poison and patience. Mrs. Thorne, one asked. Sarah here is feeling unwell. I think she needs rest. Please escort her to her room and make sure she recovers. The men understood, grabbed Sarah's arms. She screamed once before they clamped a hand over her mouth, dragged her toward the servants' stairs, her feet kicked uselessly against the floor. The door closed. The screaming stopped. Eventually. Marguerite returned to her desk, pulled out writing paper embossed with her monogram, began composing a letter to her lawyer. If Ravencroft wanted war, she'd give him war. But first she needed to know what he knew. And the best way to discover that was to force his hand. She wrote quickly. Precise instructions, money transfers, contact information for certain people who specialized in problems that needed permanent solutions. By evening, Sarah would be gone. A tragic accident, a fall down the stairs perhaps, or maybe she'd simply vanished. Servants did that sometimes. Ran off with sweethearts or gambling debts. No one would question it. And tomorrow Marguerite would turn her attention to Cordelia, to Ravencroft, to anyone who thought they could threaten what she'd built. She'd killed before, would kill again if necessary. That was the thing about murder. The first one was hard, the second easier. By the third, it was just another problem solved. Back in Newport, Cordelia stood in the manor's basement holding a pistol. It was smaller than she expected. A Derringer, 2 barrels, pocket-sized. The kind of weapon wealthy women carried in their reticules for protection. It's loaded, Dashiell said from beside her room. Always assume it's loaded. They were in the shooting range he'd had constructed beneath the manor. Targets lined the far wall. The smell of gun oil and powder hung in the air. Why are you teaching me this? Cordelia asked. Because Percival will try again. And next time, he might not come to the front door. Dashiell positioned himself behind her. His hands covered hers, adjusting her grip. Marguerite won't accept defeat quietly. She spent 8 years building her plans. You're the only obstacle. So I learned to shoot. You learned to survive. His breath was warm against her ear. Feet shoulder-width apart. Arms extended. Both eyes open. Don't squint. Cordelia adjusted her stance. The gun was heavier than it looked. Cold metal warming slowly against her palm. The first barrel fires with this trigger. His finger guided hers. The second with this one. 2 shots. Make them count. What if I miss? Then you run. His voice was matter-of-fact. But you won't miss. Not if you practice. He stepped back, left her alone with the weapon and the target and her own fear. Whenever you're ready. Cordelia breathed slowly, aimed at the paper target 30 feet away. A man's silhouette. She imagined Percival's face. Marguerite's cruel smile. She pulled the trigger. The recoil surprised her. The noise echoed through the basement like thunder. The bullet punched through paper somewhere left of center mass. Good, Dashiell said. Again. She fired the second barrel. Closer this time. The target's shoulder. Better. Reload. They practiced for 2 hours. Loading, firing, reloading. Her ears rang despite the cotton wool he'd given her. Her hands ached. But with each shot, her aim improved. By the end, she could hit center mass 3 times out of 5. Enough, Dashiell finally said. You'll be sore tomorrow. Cordelia set down the gun. Her hands were shaking again. Different from before. Adrenaline instead of rage. I've never hurt anyone, she said quietly. You might have to. He began cleaning the weapons with practiced efficiency. Military precision. Can you do it if necessary? Could she? A week ago, Cordelia would have said no, would have been horrified at the thought. But a week ago, she hadn't known her aunt murdered her parents, hadn't learned she was supposed to die after her wedding, hadn't discovered that survival sometimes required violent weapons. Yes, she said, if it's them or me, I choose me. Something shifted in Dashiell's expression, pride maybe, or recognition of something he'd hoped to see. Good. He holstered the clean Derringer, handed it to her. Keep this with you, always. The weight in her pocket felt wrong, foreign, but also strangely comforting. They climbed back to the main house. Evening was falling. Servants lit lamps throughout the manor. The smell of dinner drifted from the kitchens, roasted meat and fresh bread and something sweet. There's one more thing, Dashiell said as they reached the entrance hall. A plan, but it requires you to trust me completely. I'm listening. We fake your death. Cordelia stopped walking. What? Marguerite wants you dead, so we give her what she wants. Publicly. A carriage accident on the cliff road. Very tragic. Very fatal. He turned to face her fully. It draws her out, makes her feel safe. And when she comes to Newport to claim whatever's left, we catch her. Yes. It was insane, dangerous. Everything could go wrong. It was also brilliant. When, Cordelia asked, tomorrow, I've already drafted the obituary. The newspaper will run it in the evening edition. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, handed it to her. She read it slowly. Tragic accident claims life of Miss Cordelia Thorne. Miss Cordelia Thorne, lately of New York, died yesterday evening when her carriage overturned on Ocean Drive in Newport. The unfortunate young woman was thrown from the vehicle and perished from her injuries. She is survived by her aunt, Mrs. Marguerite Thorne of Manhattan. A private service will be held at the family estate. You've thought of everything, Cordelia said. Not everything, but enough. His gray eyes held hers. It only works if you're willing to disappear completely. No letters, no contact with anyone. As far as the world knows, you're dead until we're ready to reveal the truth. How long? A week, maybe 2. However long it takes for Marguerite to show her hand. 2 weeks of not existing, of hiding while her aunt celebrated her death, of trusting this man she barely knew to protect her while she was supposedly in a grave. What if she doesn't come? She'll come. Dashiell's voice was certain. She killed your parents for $80,000. She won't leave the rest unclaimed. Cordelia looked down at the obituary again, her name in print, her death announced like it was already fact. Maybe it was. Maybe the girl who'd knelt at that altar yesterday, powerless, afraid, grateful for scraps, was already dead. And whoever was left was someone new, someone harder, someone willing to fake her own death to catch a murderer. All right, she said. We do it. Dashiell smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger. Less like a railroad baron and more like a man who'd just won something he'd been fighting for. Tomorrow morning, then, we'll stage the accident at dawn. By evening, you'll be dead. He paused, and Marguerite Thorne's world will begin to crumble. The next morning came with fog rolling in from the ocean. Perfect weather for tragedy. Cordelia watched from an upstairs window as servants prepared the carriage. They'd dressed a mannequin in one of her new gowns, weighted it to approximate her size. When the carriage went over the cliff, the dummy would fall with it. Shatter on the rocks below. The fog would help. In that thick gray soup, anything wrapped in fabric and broken on rocks could pass for human remains. At least from a distance. At least long enough. Mrs. Hawthorne appeared at her elbow. It's time, dear. You need to hide. Dashiell had prepared a room in the manor's oldest wing. Servants' quarters from decades past, now unused and forgotten. A bed, a chair, a window overlooking the garden. Everything she'd need to wait while the world thought she was dead. They descended back stairs meant for staff. Cordelia wore a plain dress, no jewelry, nothing that would identify her if somehow she was seen. Morrison met them at the bottom. The carriage is ready, sir. We'll send it over the edge in 10 minutes. Good. Dashiell turned to Cordelia. Last chance to change your mind. She shook her head. Let's end this. He led her to the hidden room. It was smaller than her suite, but comfortable. Someone had left flowers, ivory blooms, not roses, and books, and writing materials in case she wanted to document what happened. "I'll bring your meals personally," Mrs. Hawthorne said. "No one else will know you're here." "Thank you." The housekeeper smiled sadly, squeezed her hand, then left, closing the door softly behind her. Cordelia was alone. She moved to the window. From here, she could see the cliff road. The carriage moved slowly toward the edge, guided by two footmen who jumped clear at the last moment. Dashiell stood nearby watching, waiting. The carriage reached the designated spot. The footmen leaped. The horses were already unhitched. They'd be led away safely while the empty carriage continued forward. It tipped over the edge almost gracefully, fell 30 feet to the rocks below. The crash echoed across the water. Wood splintered. The mannequin flew through the air and landed in a broken heap. In the fog wrapped in torn fabric, it looked disturbingly real. Cordelia felt sick. That could have been her. Should have been her if Marguerite's plans had succeeded. Broken on rocks because she was worth more dead than alive. Not anymore. She watched Dashiell dispatch servants to create the scene, to alert authorities. Newport police would arrive, see the wreckage through fog, and not examine too closely. Not when a man of Ravencroft's influence claimed the body immediately for private family burial. The fog was thick enough, the fall devastating enough, the mannequin convincing enough from 30 feet away. And Dashiell's reputation ensured no one would question him. By noon, everyone would know. By evening, the newspapers would run the story. And somewhere in Manhattan, Marguerite would read about her niece's death and smile. Cordelia closed the curtains, sat on the bed, waited. For the first time in her life, being invisible was her choice, her weapon, her strategy. And when Marguerite came because she would come, Cordelia would be ready. The telegram reached Marguerite at 3 o'clock. Regret to inform Cordelia, Thorne died in carriage accident. Newport stop, body recovered. Stop arrangements pending stop. D. Ravencroft. She read it 3 times, checking for tricks, for hidden meanings. Then she laughed. The sound startled her cat, startled the empty rooms around her. Sarah was gone, vanished yesterday, problem solved. The new housekeeper wouldn't start until next week. Marguerite was alone with her triumph. "Ma'am," a voice from the doorway made her jump. One of the men she'd hired, the rough ones, standing in her parlor like he owned it. "I didn't hear you knock," she said icily. "Didn't knock. You said to come when the job was done." "What job?" "The girl, Sarah. She's in the river now, won't be found." Marguerite's stomach turned. She'd told them to handle it, hadn't specified how, hadn't wanted to know. "Fine, your payment is on the table. Take it and leave." The man pocketed the money, studied her with eyes that had seen too much. "You need anything else handled?" She almost said no, then thought about Ravencroft, about Cordelia dying so conveniently, about loose ends that needed tying. "Not yet," she said, "but stay available. There may be more work soon." He nodded and left. Marguerite returned to the telegram. Body recovered. Cordelia dead. The inheritance hers. Finally, she should have felt relieved, victorious. Instead, she felt uneasy. Something about the timing, about Ravencroft sending the telegram personally, about everything falling into place so neatly. But Cordelia was dead. The body had been found on the rocks. The death would be certified. There was no trick here. Just good fortune. Still, Marguerite walked to her desk, began writing, not to lawyers this time, to someone else. Someone who specialized in information, in discovering what people didn't want discovered. Because if Dashiell Ravencroft was playing games, Marguerite Thorne intended to know about it. And if he wasn't, if Cordelia really was dead, then she'd claim what was hers and disappear into a comfortable widowhood far from New York. Either way, she'd win. She always did. 4 days after her death, Cordelia stood in the hidden room watching Marguerite arrive at Ravencroft Manor. The carriage was black lacquer trimmed in silver. Expensive but not ostentatious. The kind wealthy widows rode to funerals, to estate settlements, to claim inheritances from nieces who died conveniently young. Marguerite descended wearing mourning clothes that probably cost more than the dress she'd torn at the wedding. Black silk that caught the afternoon light, jet beads at her throat, a veil concealing whatever expression she wore, grief or triumph, or the careful blankness of a woman who'd learned to hide her true face. Morrison met her at the entrance. Even from the 4th-floor window, Cordelia could see his posture stiffen. military bearing deployed against an enemy he recognized on sight. Daschle emerged from the house. He dressed for the occasion, full formal wear, black armband, the picture of a man mourning a guest who died under his protection. His face revealed nothing. They spoke. Cordelia couldn't hear the words, but she read the body language. Marguerite gesturing toward the house, Daschle shaking his head, her insistence growing sharper. His refusal staying polite but absolute. Finally, he gestured toward the garden. They walked together down the path. Far enough from the house that servants couldn't overhear. Close enough to the cliffs that the ocean provided cover for conversation. Cordelia pressed closer to the window. She'd been trapped in this room for 4 days. Waiting, reading, practicing with the Derringer until she could load it blindfolded. Going slowly mad with inaction while Daschle laid the groundwork for what came next. Tomorrow night it would end. Mrs. Astor's annual gala. 400 guests, the event of the season. And Marguerite would be there. Cordelia's resurrection would be public. Witnessed, undeniable. Just as Daschle had promised. Or the nearest thing this world allows. She turned from the window, began preparing for what came next. Tomorrow she would rise from the dead. Tomorrow her aunt would pay. That night, long after Marguerite had left and the manor settled into darkness, Cordelia woke to the smell of smoke. Fire, somewhere close. She sat up, ran to the door, locked. Daschle's precaution to keep her hidden. She pounded on it. Help, fire, footsteps in the hallway. The lock clicked, Mrs. Hawthorne's face pale with fear. The east wing, someone said it. They ran, down the servants' stairs, through the kitchen. Cordelia could see orange light flickering through windows. Hear the roar of flames consuming wood and fabric. Daschle was already there, fighting the blaze with servants hauling water. But it was spreading too fast, too hot. Professional work. Someone had done this deliberately. The ledgers, Cordelia grabbed Daschle's arm. All the evidence, in my study, different wing. He coughed through smoke. But your rooms, everything he'd prepared for her, the dresses, the furniture, the careful welcome, going up in flames, a sound from inside the burning wing. Human, screaming. One of the servants, a young footman, was trapped. Cordelia saw him through a window beating against glass that wouldn't break. Daschle ran toward him, but the doorway was engulfed. No way through. Cordelia looked around, saw a marble statue. Heavy. She grabbed it, heaved it through the window. Glass exploded. Smoke poured out. The footman climbed through, coughing, burned, but alive. There, Morrison pointed, a figure running through the gardens. Dark clothes, moving fast, the arsonist. Daschle took off after him. Cordelia followed before anyone could stop her. Her lungs burned, her borrowed nightgown caught on bushes. But she ran. The figure reached the property wall, started climbing. Daschle caught him halfway up, yanked him down. They crashed to the ground together, fighting. Fists, the stranger had a knife, slashed at Daschle's arm. Drew blood. Cordelia reached for the Derringer in her pocket, aimed, fired. The bullet hit stone beside the stranger's head. He froze. Next one doesn't miss, she said. Daschle pinned him. Morrison arrived with footmen. They bound his wrists with rope. Who hired you? Daschle demanded. The man spat. Go to hell. Wrong answer. Daschle twisted his arm. Something cracked. The man screamed. Who? Hired. You. Marguerite Thorne. She paid me $500 to burn this place, kill anyone inside. Cordelia's hands shook. Marguerite hadn't waited, hadn't believed the death was real, had tried to destroy the evidence and murder them all. Police arrived, arrested the arsonist, took his confession. Commissioner Walsh himself came roused from bed, but eager to help when Daschle explained. The fire was contained by dawn. The east wing was destroyed, but the rest of the manor survived. The ledgers were safe, the evidence intact, and Marguerite had just confessed to attempted murder through a hired proxy. Tomorrow, Daschle said as the sun rose over the ruins, tomorrow we end this. Cordelia looked at the ashes of the rooms he'd built for her, at the servants' nursing burns, at the man who'd almost died because Marguerite couldn't tolerate obstacles. Yes, she said, tomorrow. The next evening, Cordelia stood before a full-length mirror wearing midnight blue silk and Ravencroft sapphires. The dress fit perfectly. Empire waist, long sleeves despite the summer heat. The sapphires 3 generations old, worth more than her parents' entire estate, lay cool against her collarbone. She looked like someone else, someone who belonged at society galas, someone who wore $50,000 in jewelry without flinching, someone who'd risen from the dead. Mrs. Hawthorne pinned her hair in an elaborate style that took 20 minutes and half a dozen hairpins. Your mother wore these sapphires once, at her wedding. Cordelia touched the stones. How do you know? I helped her dress that day. The housekeeper's reflection smiled sadly. She was terrified. Marrying against her family's wishes, knowing she'd lose everything for love. Was it worth it? She thought so, even at the end. Mrs. Hawthorne adjusted a final pin. Love doesn't make you safe, but it makes you brave. A knock, Dashiell's voice through the door. May I enter? Yes. He stepped inside wearing evening wear that probably cost more than most men earned in a year. Black tailcoat, white tie, precision tailoring that emphasized shoulders and height, and the barely leashed violence of a man who'd learned to move through society while never quite belonging to it. He stopped when he saw her. Just stopped, stared like she was something he'd imagined and couldn't quite believe was real. You're beautiful, he said finally. I'm terrified. That too. He moved closer, pulled a small box from his pocket. One more thing. Inside was a platinum wedding band, simple, elegant, engraved with words too small to read without lifting it close. Cordelia picked it up, tilted it toward the light. My Eleanor, my salvation. She looked up sharply. Eleanor was my mother's name. I know. His gray eyes held hers. Your middle name, too. Cordelia Eleanor Thorne. Why this inscription? Because you saved me and didn't know it. Dashiell took the ring from her trembling fingers. I was drowning in guilt. My father's suicide, the railroad accident. The people who died because I delegated responsibility to men who cut corners. He paused. Then I saw a girl grieving alone, and I remembered what mattered. Justice, purpose. He held the ring between them. May I? Cordelia extended her left hand. The ring slid on perfectly. Warm despite the cool metal, like it had been waiting. We're not married, she said. Not yet. His voice was quiet. But after tonight, I'm going to ask you. Properly. And I hope you'll say yes. Why, boo? Because I fell in love with a stranger's grief. And yesterday I fell in love with her courage. He lifted her hand, pressed his lips to the ring. Because you're the only person I've met who understands that survival sometimes requires becoming someone new. What if I say no? Then I'll spend the rest of my life loving you from a distance. He released her hand. But I'll still destroy Marguerite Thorne. Cordelia believed him, believed all of it. The obsession, the patience, the years of watching and waiting and building a case against a woman who thought she'd gotten away with murder. Ask me after, she said. After justice. After justice, he agreed. Morrison appeared in the doorway. The carriage is ready, sir. Mrs. Astor's ball begins in 1 hour. They descended the grand staircase together, Dashiell's hand on her elbow, steady, sure, the weight of the derringer in her pocket, a reminder that safety was an illusion and violence sometimes necessary. The carriage ride to Mrs. Astor's Fifth Avenue mansion took 15 minutes, long enough for Cordelia's courage to falter, to remember she was supposed to be dead, that 400 people thought she'd died on the rocks, that her aunt had come to Newport specifically to collect her inheritance. What if this doesn't work? She whispered. It will work. Dashiell's certainty was absolute. Marguerite killed your parents for money. She tried to kill you. Tonight she faces consequences. And what if she runs? Morrison has men at every exit. The police commissioner is a personal friend. He paused. She won't run. She'll fight. And when she does, we'll have her. The mansion appeared through the carriage window. 3 stories of limestone and marble glowing with gaslight. Carriages lined the circular drive. Women in silk and diamonds, men in evening wear. The cream of Newport society gathered to celebrate summer and wealth and the illusion that money made them untouchable. Their carriage joined the queue. Dashiell squeezed her hand once. Ready. Cordelia thought about her parents, about 8 years of humiliation, about a torn dress and blood on marble, and 500 witnesses who'd done nothing. Ready, she said. Inside Mrs. Astor's ballroom, Marguerite stood near the champagne fountain, calculating percentages. The will was clear. Everything passed to her as sole surviving relative. The house in Manhattan sold. The remaining investments liquidated. After lawyers' fees and expenses, Marguerite estimated she'd clear $40,000 from her niece's death. Not the 80 she'd already spent, but enough. Combined with careful management, it would last another decade, maybe more. Mrs. Thorne, Mrs. Astor materialized at her elbow, the grand dame of Newport society, arbiter of who mattered and who didn't. My condolences on your loss. Thank you. Marguerite touched her handkerchief to dry eyes. Cordelia was like a daughter to me. I'm sure. Mrs. Astor's tone suggested she was sure of nothing. And yet she was staying with Mr. Ravencroft when she died. How unusual. She'd had a difficult time. I thought distance from New York might help her recover from recent disappointments. Quite. Mrs. Astor sipped champagne, studied Marguerite with eyes that had witnessed 50 years of society scandals. Mr. Ravencroft mentioned you two had met, that he knew Cordelia previously. Something in her voice, a question, or a warning. He was very kind, Marguerite said carefully, taking her in after the wedding incident. Yes, that incident, Mrs. Astor smiled. 500 witnesses to humiliation. And then Mr. Ravencroft walked her out like she was royalty. Quite dramatic. He has a reputation for dramatic gestures. He has a reputation for many things. Ruthlessness, patience, absolute destruction of his enemies. The older woman's eyes locked on Marguerite's. I'd be careful, Mrs. Thorne. Mr. Ravencroft doesn't forget slights, and he doesn't forgive. Before Marguerite could respond, a stir rippled through the ballroom. Conversations died. Heads turned toward the entrance. The orchestra faltered mid-waltz. Mrs. Astor's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips, and Marguerite Thorne felt the floor drop from beneath her feet. Because walking through the ballroom doors alive and impossibly beautiful in midnight blue silk and Ravencroft sapphires was Cordelia. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Felt like hours. Cordelia stood at the entrance with Dashiell's hand on her elbow. 400 people stared. Some gasped. Several women clutched their fans. One man's monocle actually fell. Mrs. Astor recovered first. Smiled slowly. Miss Thorne, how unexpected. Mrs. Astor, Cordelia's voice carried across the sudden silence. Thank you for the invitation. But someone in the crowd couldn't help themselves. You're dead. Greatly exaggerated. Dashiell's voice was cool, amused, a misunderstanding. Miss Thorne is very much alive. The whispers started then, spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. Dead but not dead. A scandal. A trick. What did it mean? Marguerite stood frozen near the champagne fountain. Her face had gone from pink to white to gray. She looked like someone had struck her, or like she was seeing a ghost, which in a way she was. Cordelia walked toward her, slowly. Let every person in the ballroom watch. Let them witness. Let them remember. She stopped 3 feet from her aunt, close enough to see the veins pulsing in Marguerite's temple, the slight tremor in her gloved hands, the absolute terror hiding behind fury in her eyes. Hello, Aunt Marguerite. Cordelia's voice was steady, surprised. Marguerite's mouth opened, closed, no sound emerged. I believe you came to Newport to claim my inheritance. Cordelia gestured around the ballroom. How convenient. We have witnesses. This is insane. Marguerite found her voice, made it loud, outraged. You faked your death. Do you have any idea the distress of thinking I was dead? Cordelia interrupted. Like the distress you felt when my parents died. The ballroom went silent again. Different silence now. Hungry, anticipating blood. Dashiell stepped forward, pulled a folder from his jacket. Mrs. Marguerite Thorne. Before these assembled witnesses, I present evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. He opened the folder, began distributing papers to the nearest guests. Bank records, forged signatures, the chemist's ledger showing arsenic purchases. This is slander, Marguerite's voice rose. I'll sue. You'll do nothing. Dashiell's voice cut through her protests. Because every document is verified, every signature authenticated, every witness prepared to testify. Astor took one of the papers. Read it slowly, her expression hardened. She'd seen scandals, had orchestrated several. But fraud and murder were different. Those couldn't be forgiven with apologies and strategic marriages. These are serious accusations, Mr. Ravencroft, she said carefully. Yes, which is why I've invited the police commissioner to attend tonight. On cue, a uniformed officer stepped through the ballroom entrance. Commissioner Theodore Walsh. 40 years with the Newport Police. Honest. Incorruptible. The kind of man who couldn't be bought and wouldn't be intimidated. Marguerite saw him and went paler. Mrs. Thorne, the commissioner's voice was formal. I have a warrant for your arrest. Embezzlement of $80,000 from your ward. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Attempted arson and murder. Arson, the word echoed through the ballroom. Marguerite's hired man had confessed, had given her name, had detailed the payment and instructions, and suspicion of murder in the deaths of Thomas and Margaret Thorne. Murder. The word landed like a bomb. Marguerite looked around wildly, at the crowd, at Mrs. Astor, at Cordelia. This is a conspiracy. She's lying. Ravencroft has turned her against me with lies. These aren't lies. Mrs. Hawthorne stepped forward from the crowd. Cordelia hadn't seen her enter. I was Margaret Thorne's lady's maid. I witnessed you threaten her. I saw the arsenic you purchased. I kept the letters where Margaret feared for her life and named you as the threat. You... Marguerite spun toward the housekeeper. You're just a servant. No one will believe. I believe her. Mrs. Astor's voice cut through the protests. Mrs. Hawthorne and I attended finishing school together. Her word is good enough for me. One by one, other voices joined. Society matrons who'd watched Marguerite for years with suspicion, who'd heard rumors, who'd wondered how a widow lived so well on so little, who'd seen Cordelia in her cast-off dresses and attic room and known something was wrong. Marguerite was drowning in witnesses, in accumulated suspicions finally voiced, in 8 years of careful cruelty coming back all at once. Her hand went to her reticule. Don't. Dashiell's voice was quiet but absolute. She froze. Then, in a motion faster than seemed possible for a woman in her 40s wearing full skirts, Marguerite pulled a small pistol from her bag. Screams erupted. Guests scattered. The orchestra fled their instruments. Marguerite grabbed the nearest person, Sophronia Ainsworth, a young socialite who'd been standing too close, yanked her back against her chest, pressed the gun to her temple. Stay back. Marguerite's voice was raw, animal. All of you, stay back, or I'll kill her. The ballroom descended into chaos. Commissioner Walsh drew his own weapon. Dashiell moved to shield Cordelia. Mrs. Astor remarkably didn't move at all, just stood watching with the detached interest of someone observing a particularly dramatic opera. Let her go, Marguerite. Cordelia's voice cut through the panic. This is between us. Shut up. Marguerite's hands shook. The gun wavered. You should be dead. You were supposed to die. Everything would have been fine if you'd just died like you were supposed to. Like my parents, Cordelia took one step forward. Did you tell them that too before you poisoned them? They deserved it. Margaret had everything. The inheritance, the love, father's approval. And what did I get? Nothing. Spittle flew from Marguerite's mouth. The careful society mask completely shattered. So I took what should have been mine, and I'd do it again, confession public. Before 400 witnesses. Commissioner Walsh moved slowly sideways, trying to flank. But Marguerite saw him and pressed the gun harder against Sophronia's head. The girl whimpered. I'll kill her, Marguerite said. I swear I'll... Sophronia went limp. Dead weight. Years of dance training turned into tactical advantage. She dropped straight down, slipping from Marguerite's grip. The gun swung wild. Cordelia's hand went to her pocket, found the Derringer, drew it in one smooth motion. Aimed, Marguerite saw her, saw the gun. For one frozen second, they faced each other across 15 feet of marble floor. Niece and aunt, victim and murderer, both armed, both desperate. Cordelia's finger tightened on the trigger. She could do it. One shot, center mass, end this forever. Make Marguerite pay, not with jail or testimony or public humiliation, with blood, with the same violence she'd inflicted on Cordelia's parents. Justice or revenge. The difference suddenly mattered. Cordelia lowered her gun. No, she said quietly. You're not worth the bullet. She looked at Commissioner Walsh. Arrest her. Marguerite screamed, tried to run, made it 3 steps before 2 officers tackled her. The gun clattered across marble. Her careful updo came undone. Her dress tore at the shoulder silk, ripping, just like at the wedding. Poetic justice, after all. They hauled her up, handcuffed her wrists. She fought like a wild animal, screaming, cursing, calling Cordelia every vile name she could think of. The ballroom watched in silence. This would be discussed for years, decades. The night Marguerite Thorne confessed to murder in front of Newport's finest. The night Cordelia Thorne rose from the dead and chose mercy over violence. As they dragged Marguerite toward the exit, she passed Cordelia one last time. Their eyes met. "You were always worthless," Marguerite hissed. "Nothing I did could change that." Cordelia smiled. "I was never the worthless one, Aunt Marguerite. That was always you." The officers pulled her away, out of the ballroom, into a police wagon waiting outside, to jail, to trial, to the consequences she'd avoided for 8 years. The doors closed behind them. The ballroom exhaled collectively. Mrs. Astor began to clap, slow, measured. Within seconds, others joined, 400 people applauding, not for scandal, for justice. Cordelia stood in the center of it all, still holding the derringer, feeling the weight of what she'd almost done, what she'd chosen not to do. Dashiell appeared at her side, took the gun gently from her trembling hands. "Well done," he murmured. "I almost killed her." "But you didn't." He turned her to face him. "You chose law over revenge, civilization over violence. That took more courage than pulling the trigger." Cordelia wasn't sure she believed that, but she nodded anyway. Mrs. Astor approached. "Miss Thorne, that was quite the performance." "It wasn't a performance." "No." The older woman studied her carefully. "I don't suppose it was." She glanced at Dashiell. "I assume you'll be making an honest woman of her." "I intend to ask." "Good. Society has enough scandals." Mrs. Astor smiled slightly, though I must say this one was particularly satisfying. She swept away to restore order to her disrupted ball. Within minutes, the orchestra was playing again. Champagne flowing. Conversations resuming as if attempted murder was just another evening's entertainment. Cordelia let Dashiell lead her to a quieter corner. Her legs felt uncertain. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion behind. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now Marguerite faces trial. The prosecutor has her confession witnessed by 400 people. She'll spend the rest of her life in prison. And Percival, already arrested, conspiracy to commit murder. He'll testify against Marguerite in exchange for 20 years instead of hanging." Dashiell paused. "His mother lost their house paying his debts. He lost everything." "Good." Cordelia felt no sympathy. "They both deserve it." "They do." Dashiell took her hand, the one wearing the platinum ring. "But that's not what I meant. I meant what happens with us. You said you'd ask, after justice." "I did." He knelt, right there in Mrs. Astor's ballroom, in front of whatever guests were still watching. "Cordelia Eleanor Thorne, I've loved you for years. I'll love you for decades more if you'll let me. Marry me. Not because you need protection, not because you're grateful, but because you choose to, because we're better together than apart." Cordelia looked down at him, this man who'd watched her grieve, who'd investigated her pain, who'd built her a room and filled it with flowers and waited years to speak to her, who'd destroyed her enemies and given her the choice of how to end it. She thought about her parents, about love that cost everything and gave everything back, about choosing bravery over safety. "Yes," she said, "not for protection, not for gratitude, but because I choose this, choose you, choose us." He stood, kissed her. The ballroom applauded again. Mrs. Astor called for champagne, and somewhere in a police wagon headed for jail, Marguerite Thorne screamed into the darkness about injustice and lies and nieces who should have stayed dead. 18 months later, Cordelia stood in the garden of Ravencroft Manor, watching 8 young women practice arithmetic under the elms. Widows mostly, a few orphans, all hungry to learn what men said women shouldn't know: numbers, accounts, business. The sign above the entrance read, "Thorne Ravencroft School for Women's Financial Independence." Mrs. Hawthorne managed operations. Mrs. Astor served on the board. Sophronia taught self-defense. Dashiell approached. "They're doing well." "They are." Cordelia took his hand. The platinum ring caught sunlight. "Mrs. Pemberton just passed her accounting examination. She'll be managing her own investments by month's end. Your mother would be proud." "I think so." "Wayne." She looked at the ocean beyond the gardens. at the cliffs where she was supposed to have died. Do you ever think about that day, the church? Every day. He touched her cheek. I think about silk tearing, blood on marble, and you choosing to survive. We both survived. We did. He pulled her close, and we built something better. They stood together as evening fell. Students packed their books, servants lit lamps. The ocean continued its endless work below the cliffs. Cordelia thought about the girl who'd knelt at that altar. Worthless, they'd called her, but she'd never been worthless. She just needed to prove it to herself, and she had.